Hey everyone, Cell here. I just made way too long of a video discussing this interaction, so I wanted to trim it down to the basics and discuss the potential power of Vengeful Cry. So Vengeful Cry requires you to take a savage hit to be activated, after which you have a 2-second window to do so. It grants max rage and rage loss prevention independently of the power of the Warcry, and it gives rage regeneration based on the power of enemies in range. With at most 70% effective chaos resistance, you can cleanly trigger that savage hit on yourself with a Doedre's elixir. It'll cause you to take 50% of your max health as chaos damage. With 70% resistance and no other forms of hit-based damage reduction, you'll be taking exactly the 15% required for it to be considered a savage hit. That hit dealt by the Flask doesn't scale with Flask effect, by the way, as far as I can tell, just from having Tides of Time equipped. And we can demonstrate here that it does indeed work. If I press the Flask, I then have the window open to activate Vengeful Cry. So, the Flask requires a ton of charges, though. This one requires 33, the other one I have requires 31. And with a combination of Flask charge generation and Warcry duration, you can permanently sustain max rage, which, remember, is going to be boosted by the fact that the Warcry itself gives you more max rage, almost as much as the base itself. Can potentially give you even more than the base max rage if you scale even a little bit of buff effect. So, the more you have of each charge generation and Warcry duration, the more comfortable it'll be to sustain max rage. In the worst case scenario, you can use 2 separate flasks like I have on here. In this case, I have the Tides of Time for 3 charges every 3 seconds. I've anointed replenishing remedies for 2 every 3 seconds and 15% charges gained, increased charges gained rather. And that totals up to 5.75 charges every 3 seconds. And yes, fractional flask charges are a thing. So I think it would take a decent bit more investment on the tree, or it would take using a different Ascendancy entirely to facilitate comfortably moving down to 1 flask, which is why I'm using 2 for this demonstration. It's a pretty tall order, this setup, but you do get a pretty huge chunk of damage out of it, so especially if you don't have other ways of generating rage or sustaining your max rage comfortably. And going along with that, the benefit of doing this is tied directly to the benefits of rage itself. Like I keep saying, you'll have permanent uptime on max rage if you want, or you can use Berserk or other rage-consuming skills. Same deal. The more power you have, the more generation you'll have, and that scales with buff effect, of course. So for me as a chieftain, I'm maxing out 15 base rage regeneration per second and scaling that up with the buff effect, getting over 30 rage generation per second right now, so that's quite a bit. And with that buff effect, that also scales the max rage, of course. If I use it again, you can see that I have 81 max rage here. And as I was saying before, it'll take a little bit of finesse to kind of pull this off if you're doing it live, but you can also use 2 flasks to the effect of fully sustaining your maximum rage here, again, if that's something you desire. You can get away without using Chieftain or Redblade Banner. This would be the Chieftain Ascendancy notable, the new one that gives infinite power. It does the same thing as Redblade Banner. But because of the nature of this Warcry in particular, you can use the minimum of 10 power, and that'll give you a base of 6 rage generation per second. Again, same setup. If you have no Warcry buff effect or anything else, you can still cap yourself out at 55 rage with that 6 per second. It'll just take, close to 10 seconds to get there. But once you're there, as long as you keep up the Warcry, you'll be there permanently. So I personally prefer not to do that as I'm thinking about this in theory crafting. You'll still get a lot of max rage by default, like I said, but I'd probably rather invest into the Warcries to either get, a notable, a different mastery, anything like that, like the recover 15% of life when you use a Warcry. That's perfect when you're taking 15% of your health as damage after resistances to activate the Warcry in the first place. So, things like that. And if I'm investing in Warcries to begin with, like if I'm picking up these two clusters, which I have often done in my Chieftain theory crafting, just for increased buff effect and duration, both of these clusters give. And if I'm doing that, I probably want to use multiple Warcries. And the other Warcries are not as nice with the minimum of 10 power. For those ones, I'd much rather have infinite power from, again, Chieftain or Red Blade Banner. So, yeah, there's definitely a way to use strictly Vengeful Cry if you want to, but I personally would rather just go for a Warcry package as a whole and slot this into that, which is kind of how this whole idea came about to begin with. Now, this does pair nicely with duration skills, which is why I'm thinking of running a Blade Vortex character at some point. So I pick up the duration cluster here. Again, some of these nodes give Warcry duration as well out of these two Warcry clusters. And the Chieftain gives 15% duration here. So we can see if I use it again, I'm at 11.8 seconds, I believe, is what it amounts to. Vengeful Cry is a little bit longer than my Enduring Cry right now just because of level differences, but you can get that 3.4 second base time on all of your Warcries and have a pretty comfortable, again, 11-12 seconds kind of there. So anyways, that is basically the showcase. Hopefully you think it's as interesting as I do. Again, I want to highlight the fact that with this current setup, 81 rage, that's 81% more damage. Lifting Nerd Bro voice. And that'll be attack damage by default and more spell damage with Ravenous Passion. So definitely let me know if you can think of other skills, builds, setups you might want to use this in. I'm interested to hear what you guys can come up with. And again, I might try to pull off the Blade Vortex character I've been kind of theory crafting on the side if I can get the uniques I need in the League. I could do it in Standard, of course, and I may end up doing that if I don't feel like going for the items in League. So stick around to see updates on that and other potentially weird theory crafts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.